everyone. Good evening, and welcome to the first episode of Vital Dissent. I'm your host, Patrick McFarlane. I'm a practicing attorney, a writer, and the Justin Raimondo Fellow at the Libertarian Institute. My work has appeared on antiwar.com, globalresearch.ca, and on Zero Hedge. In this first episode of Vital Dissent, I'm going to be introducing to you the theme of the show, and I'm going to be telling you what will be different from my first podcast, Liberty Weekly. I will also be telling you about some things that will be staying the same. One of the things that will be different from this show, as opposed to my first show, Liberty Weekly, is that this show is going to be emphasized more on storytelling and putting facts together in a narrative than Liberty Weekly was. But one thing that will stay the same will be the same deep dive, hard-hitting research and presentation that you are familiar with from Liberty Weekly. So by way of storytelling, we're going to start with this. On October 6th, President Joe Biden declared that the risk of nuclear Armageddon is at its highest point since the 1962 Cuban Missile Crisis. Now, when Biden made this declaration, it seemed to me to be a public recognition of a thing that anti-war activists and even well-respected realist foreign policy commentators had been warning about for quite some time. And in this first episode, we're going to be talking about some of those warnings and weaving together the narrative of the flashpoint that we are, the inflection point that we're at right now. The title of this episode is Vital Dissent at the End of History. And we'll be talking about what that term even means, the end of history, because I mean it twofold ways, right? One, the end of history being the end of the world and the risk of nuclear obliteration. But the end of history is also a term that neoconservatives use to define their ideal unipolar moment where the United States is the world hegemon, and that continues on in perpetuity. So while, of course, the purpose of this show and the general theme of the show will be to oppose dangerous nuclear escalation between great powers and talking about this new world that we find ourselves in, the return to great power competition, or Cold War 2.0 is a less clunky title that we can use to describe this moment. Now, while we will be talking about that, the show will also explore other things that I've focused on that I think you'll find interesting, like dark history, which is government malfeasance, government and corporate malfeasance, a bit of conspiracy realism, not super off-the-wall kind of stuff, but things that are grounded in identifiable fact. We can call it conspiracy fact. And it will also talk about the psychology of killing in war and warfare in general are some of the topics that we will be exploring in this show. Now, Liberty Weekly was explicitly a show about libertarianism, and in fact, if you go back to the earliest episodes of the show, you'll find lots of episodes dealing or discussing the non-aggression principle, economics, Austrian economics, and other explicitly libertarian topics like that. In fact, the show itself was branded Liberty Weekly, being like that. This show is not just for libertarians, and in fact, I hope that people who aren't libertarians do listen to this show. There are a few reasons for that. One of the reasons being that I think at this crucial inflection point, we need to find all of the single-issue coalition allies that we can. So I hope that there are people from the new right listening to this show. I hope that there are people from the progressive left who are listening to this show. I would say the true progressives, the people who actually are still vehemently anti-war. And even so, people on the new right who would listen to this show, or just generally anyone who is interested in opposing this dangerous escalation with both Russia and China. Although the show will not be explicitly libertarian, I, of course, am a libertarian. I work at the Libertarian Institute. I will be giving my libertarian take on things, but this will not be a libertarian show. The main feature of this show will be solo episodes like this, where I sometimes talk about things on screen or review articles, but I will also be engaging in key interviews with folks like I did on Liberty Weekly, except they will be on more focused and specific and pointed topics. And there will always be a purpose to the interview that is connected to the general theme of this show. The main feature of Vital Dissent, however, and it's something that I will be able to achieve with the help of my new producer, Mises Pieces, will be long-form scripted documentary content. And we already have a documentary that we are working on. It's the first of a multi-part series on the plutonium injection experiments and the radiological weapons group that happened as a parallel program to the Manhattan Project and involved the Manhattan Project main scientists. And another thing that we're going to be talking about are nuclear escalations throughout history and other government corruption, secret type things like that. And some of those topics are already in the works. But there is the first episode of the plutonium injection experiment series is already being produced as this episode drops. If you want to stick around a little bit towards the end, I'm going to be talking about the logistics. All the podcast feeds won't change. All the channels won't change, but the new URL for the website is vitaldissent.com. So we'll be talking about that a little bit later, and I want to thank some people as well. But as for now, we're going to get into the story arc. So as we open this episode with Biden's warning of nuclear war, I wanted to highlight the role of people like myself, but also people that I would seek to be allies with, who are vital dissenters. And I suppose that's a ham-fisted way of getting into identifying these people who I find to be very important, who are the leaders of a movement who seek to educate everyone else around them so that we can take action. And you have to have, in any kind of movement, you have to have people who are out there rallying the troops and leading the charge and informing people and telling them what's going on and giving them something concrete to do. And so that is one thing that we seek to do with this show, and that we will try to ally with people of all stripes who oppose this dangerous escalation. So we are the vital dissenters, and throughout history, it's going to, as things escalate and hopefully things don't get incredibly crazy, a World War III type scenario is the worst possible outcome, of course, aside from nuclear holocaust that could happen with this escalating war over Ukraine and the escalations over Taiwan that I've covered on Liberty Weekly. And I think that it's important as these escalations move on, we're going to see it become more and more dangerous to speak out against these things, and therefore less and less people will do it. We've seen this with World War II and World War I in the United States, particularly in World War I. People who refused to go fight, conscientious objectors, were tried and imprisoned, mainly in the United Kingdom. And as we see activists like that, and of course, you can't ignore Julian Assange being basically in perpetuity right now in a life sentence, facing extradition to the United States, where he will be convicted probably for life for being a publisher. And so things like that get dangerous. And as we've seen with the widespread reaction to the war in Ukraine, we've seen people speak out against that, but we've also seen this huge corporate PR campaign that was very similar to the COVID campaign that came out and has pushed to support Ukraine and has had a lot of people marching along in lockstep. And if you think it's bad now, like 9/11, just wait until there is an actual event. And I hope it doesn't happen, but it would be some kind of rallying event that would bring people to want to directly enter the war against Russia. So, of course, because I am the Justin Raimondo Fellow at the Libertarian Institute, I'd like to highlight a piece by Justin Raimondo that he released October 5th of 2015. And one thing that it does really well is go through very quickly the history of this return to a Cold War footing against Russia. And of course, he sets it up very well. So for those of you who are just listening to the audio version, I have there's a video version on YouTube and Rumble and Odyssey. where you can see the column by Justin Raimondo. And I also have wonderful graphics here, courtesy of Mises Pieces, my producer. So Justin Raimondo writes, "This past weekend marks the 25th anniversary of the reunification of Germany, an event that formalized the end of the Cold War. The so-called German Democratic Republic, one of the most repressive of the Soviet-imposed regimes established in the wake of World War II, was no more. It imploded without a shot being fired. The largely bloodless revolution that swept across Eastern Europe, toppling communist dictatorships from Berlin to Budapest, soon penetrated the epicenter of the, quote, evil empire itself, and the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics evaporated like mist on a sunlit morning. It was the end of the Cold War, and peoples all over the world breathed a joyful sigh of relief, and yet that joy was not shared by all. The cadre of that troublesome little sect known as the neoconservatives weren't convinced that the Soviets were on their last legs. They had opposed the arms control agreements signed by Ronald Reagan in the Kremlin's twilight years, attacking them as signs of, quote, appeasement, and arguing that any rapprochement with the Soviets would give them breathing room and the strength to gather their forces for one last push against the West. The United States, they averred, should take the opportunity to push harder and institute a policy of rollback, because only a foreign policy of aggression could defeat the evil empire once and for all. They were wrong. What happened instead is that the captive nations of the Soviet bloc rose up all on their own, without any substantial support from us, and overthrew their oppressors. Not because we had weakened the USSR in any significant way, but because a system that never worked to begin with had finally reached its endpoint. As the great libertarian theoretician Ludwig von Mises had predicted as early as 1920 that it would." And I'm not going to read the entire article. Justin goes into talking about how, in spite of the Soviet propaganda, the Russian economy was no match for the West, and U.S. interventionism actually prolonged the Soviet Union. And without that intervention, it would have probably come much sooner. And he had actually talked about how Stalin realized that he needed to appeal to Soviet nationalism to fight. He needed to switch his narratives, as opposed to the Marxist revolution, to turn it into a Soviet class struggle situation, where, because he realized that people, much like Jeff Deist realized a few years ago, that people don't fight for abstractions, they fight for things like blood and soil. And so Stalin had adopted this, a mindset of Soviet nationalism, fighting the Western colonizing oppressors. And that was one thing that the neoconservative agenda justified. Western intervention in the Soviet sphere actually justified and rallied that kind of support for the Soviet regime. And so we return to our story here. Looking back on the demise of the Soviets, one can see that the same hubris that blinded the communists to their own imminent decline and fall has its echoes in today's world. And this is 2015 that Justin is writing this. The Western response to the communist implosion was at first quite reasonable. In negotiations with Mikhail Gorbachev, who saw the Soviet empire crumbling all around him, Western leaders guaranteed that NATO would not move eastward. As Josiah Shinfrinson, citing declassified U.S. government documents, argued in Foreign Affairs. The story begins in the months after the fall of the Berlin Wall, as policymakers struggled to determine whether and how a divided Germany might reunify. By early 1990, U.S. and West German officials decided to seek reunification. Uncertain about whether the Soviets would be willing to withdraw from East Germany, they decided to offer a quid pro quo. On January 31st, West German Foreign Minister Hans-Dietrich Genscher publicly declared that there would be, quote, no expansion of NATO territory eastward after reunification. 2 days later, U.S. Secretary of State James Baker met with Genscher to discuss the plan. Although Baker did not publicly endorse Genscher's plan, it served as the basis for subsequent meetings between Baker, Soviet President Mikhail Gorbachev, and Soviet Foreign Minister Eduard Shevardnadze. Apologies for the pronunciation. During these discussions, Baker repeatedly underlined the informal deal on the table, first telling Shevardnadze that NATO's jurisdiction, quote, would not move eastward, and later offering Gorbachev, quote, assurances that there would be no extension of NATO's current jurisdiction eastward. When Gorbachev argued that a, quote, broadening of the NATO zone was not acceptable, Baker replied, quote, we agree with that. Most explicit was a meeting with Shevardnadze on February 9th, in which Baker, according to the declassified State Department transcript, promised, quote, ironclad guarantees that NATO's jurisdiction or forces would not move eastward. Hammering home that point, West German Chancellor Helmut Kohl advanced an identical pledge during meetings in Moscow the next day. At that point, it was easy to see the outline of a new strategic landscape coming into view. Germany would reunify, the Soviet Union would pull back, and NATO would halt in place. According to any ordinary sense of the term East, all of the countries to which NATO later expanded would have remained outside the Western orbit. As a diplomatic cable summarizing Baker's meetings put it, quote, the secretary made clear that the U.S. had supported the goal of German unification for years, that we supported a unified Germany within NATO, but that we were prepared to ensure that NATO's military presence would not extend further eastward. Yet the domestic pressures in the U.S. for NATO, this is Raimondo writing again, and not quoting, yet the domestic pressures in the U.S. for NATO expansion were too strong to let this guarantee stand for very long. NATO maintains standards for its member militaries, and the upgrades required for the entry of the East European countries would prove immensely profitable for U.S. weapons makers, who soon launched a campaign for NATO expansion that had its tentacles reaching into both political parties, and there was also the inherently expansionist dynamic embedded in all global empires, such as the American. This was fueled by the ideological Kool-Aid of the, quote, end of history fable, pushed by the neoconservatives who dreamed of a Hegelian, quote, universal homogeneous state to be established by the United States. The Hegelian universal homogeneous state to be established by the United States. As NATO pushed up to the gates of Moscow, what happened, oddly enough, is that the Americans and the Russians switched roles. The former, invoking a militant democratic internationalism, adopted the revolutionary rhetoric and mindset of the early pre-Stalinist communists, while the latter took up the conservatizing role abandoned by Washington, which is where we are today, except that the danger posed by Washington is far greater than any of the old Soviet empire could have mustered for two reasons. One, the Soviet economic system was inherently unworkable and ended the only way it could have ended. On the other hand, the American economic system is the mightiest industrial machine the world has ever known. Capitalism has created enormous wealth, and while we've eaten a lot of our seed corn and built up an enormous mountain of debt, the system is still coasting along on the achievements of the past. Two, Stalin was essentially, quote, an isolationist. That is, he didn't want to get too involved in the affairs of other countries, concerned as he was with cementing his own despotic rule at home. That's why he ditched the old Leninism, drove Trotsky into exile, and declared the official Soviet doctrine of, quote, socialism in one country. In the U.S., however, isolationism is out of style. Both parties support an internationalist foreign policy, differing only in the details of how to apply the general principle of empire building on a global scale. What all this means is that the world's wealthiest nation has now decided it can and should rule the world, and has embarked on a campaign consisting of both military and soft power, in quotes, aspects, to achieve just that. And while this effort effectively undermines whatever claim the U.S. once had to being the leader of the free world, as Edward Snowden revealed, and as the continuous erosion of our constitutional liberties underscores every day, Washington still wields the banner of, quote, freedom to great effect, especially when compared with the regimes it seeks to overthrow. Baldly stated, the United States government is the greatest danger to peace and freedom the world has ever known. This is true precisely because it has held aloft the torch of liberty for so long, an example to the world of what a society based on individual freedom can achieve. That is the great paradox of American power. As we abandon our libertarian heritage, even as we retain the forms of a constitutional republic, we destroy what made our power possible. The process is reversible. We can restore our old republic, but only if we give up the mirage of empire. If we continue to pursue the fatal dream of a beneficent internationalism, America will lose itself, dissolve its unique character, and wreak destruction, not only on its own people, but on the peoples of the world. In switching roles with the Soviets, we prefigure their fate, and the resulting implosion is going to shake the world to its foundations in a way that the fall of the Kremlin never did. In programming our own self-destruction, we will likely drag much of the world with us. Those are the stakes, and they are high. Too high for us anti-interventionists to rest for a single moment. That is why we established antiwar.com, because this is a fight that we must win. And likewise with the establishment of Vital Dissent with Patrick McFarland, this is the new website, vitaldissent.com. It should look familiar because it's the same layout as the old website. All of the old episodes are still uploaded there, but as the weeks pass on and Vital Dissent episodes come out, all of the Liberty Weekly thumbnails will be replaced over with the new theme. And of course, I'll be publishing my articles there as well, which includes this one, which was the first episode, or the first column that I wrote about the renewed Cold War 2.0 between the United States and Russia and China, the danger of great power competition. And in a lot of ways, it picks up exactly where Justin left off. He passed away, I believe, in 2018 or 2019. But this talks about the story of this escalation that continued on, and the 2018 National Defense Strategy that I talked about. There has been a new National Defense Strategy that came out in 2020 that I wrote another column about called Uncle Sam's Grand Delusion. But in this one, it really cemented the official turn towards China as being the number one enemy of the U.S. empire. And all the foreign policy wonks, of course, if in the blob, which is a condescending term for the war party think tanks, but talking about how they are going to, in the long run, how this century, and Biden has said this, the 21st century will be defined by strategic power competition between the United States and China, basically declaring that the next century will be a war against China that hopefully doesn't go kinetic, but has the danger too. Now, that is if we survive some kind of escalation with Russia over Ukraine. Right now, we are incredibly close to a nuclear conflagration, or at the very least, an actual shooting war between the United States and Russia. We have the Nord Stream pipeline being bombed a couple weeks ago. We have the bridge connecting Russia with Crimea being bombed a couple days ago. We have renewed rocket attacks occurring, barrages occurring from Russia, a general mobilization that happened in Russia, bringing up 300,000 Russian soldiers and military personnel, and Russia actually attacking Ukraine in earnest. And I don't know exactly how bad it is right now as we're recording, but there's also the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant that was being shelled, and last week, I believe, had switched to generator power only, which really threatens a real nuclear style event, Chernobyl style event that could take place at any moment. And it's just incredibly dangerous. But the other half of this narrative, this story that we're currently seeing unfold, is the China side of it that I've covered a lot in Liberty Weekly and will continue to cover in Vital Dissent. But the story behind this being, and what Justin Raimondo goes over in this column, China and the New Cold War, I also talked about it on Liberty Weekly, libertyweekly.net / I can't remember the episode right now, 230. In the beginning, there was Raimondo. And I talked about this article at length. But the general story is just that at the end, in 1979, we had the Taiwan Relations Act come out in the beginning of the One China policy and the beginning of strategic ambiguity. And we had, it wasn't at the same time, but Nixon's visit to China and his turn to China and an opening of U.S. relations. And what really happened is that under the reforms of Deng Xiaoping, China became communist in name only. They adopted socialism with Chinese characteristics. And really the most remarkable triumph of the free market and the free market's ability to raise people out of absolute destitute poverty happened. And that took place and raised almost a billion people out of destitute poverty and created a Chinese powerhouse in effect. And this occurred as the United States, we didn't have perfect relations with China as the I think it was the third Taiwan Strait crisis came into being in 1995 when Newt Gingrich visited Taipei on a diplomatic, or excuse me, that was 1996. This was when the third Taiwan Strait crisis happened, was when the Taiwanese president visited, I believe, Cornell University in the United States and gave a speech, and it was seen as a big recognition, a U.S. recognition of Taiwanese sovereignty. And it is those kind of diplomatic envoys and recognitions of Taiwanese sovereignty and their ability to declare independence that is the big thing that hurts relations between the United States and China and causes real military escalations. But generally, the United States, after establishing good relations with China, has eroded gradually the one China policy until we have now the one China policy being a policy that says that Taiwan is part of China. There's one government of China, and that government is in Beijing, and it rules over mainland China and Taiwan. Well, the United States has gradually moved away from that and has eschewed that position, with Biden making declarations that he would defend Taiwan in the event of a Chinese invasion. But since the reforms of Deng Xiaoping, China has become more and more prosperous, and that threatens the United States' image as the world hegemon, because we're supposed to be the global superpower, but we're also supposed to be the global superpower that has the greatest economy because of our liberty and because of our free markets. And if China has more free markets than us and has more industrial might and power, that makes us look bad if they are more economically free in that way. And they threaten us on the world stage by being a larger leader and having more economic prosperity than we do. That is terrifying and looks bad for the US empire. So we have Obama beginning the Asia pivot in 2011. It's stalling out for a little bit, but being taken up again in earnest by Donald Trump and being redoubled by Joe Biden. And this is something I talked about at length in my article, all of the military pivots to China and the Cold War against China in terms of domestic policy. There's really a new kind of Red Scare in the United States that is very similar to the Red Scare that happened with Russia during the Cold War. And mostly you have this on the new right, but it is also a bipartisan thing. In a lot of ways, the rhetoric is echoed by the new right. And in a lot of ways, it's actually, when you see them kind of grapple over whether or not Nancy Pelosi should have visited Taipei, it's interesting because they want to score partisan points against Nancy Pelosi, but they also don't want to necessarily disagree with what she's doing. And so it ends up with this interesting song and dance. But ultimately, they support the underlying policy of increasing confrontation against China using Taiwan. So those are the two narrative arcs that we have going in the new Cold War against Russia and China, and the way that it's kind of carried out throughout the last 30 years, really, since the fall of the USSR and kind of the economic rise of China, but also NATO expansion westward, all leading to this crisis point that we have right now, that we ultimately really need a coalition of people who are concerned about this, who want to take measures to stop this from happening, and who really understand and appreciate the risk of what we're doing right now, that it could lead to nuclear holocaust and the extinction of the human race. And I think that's incredibly important. Okay, so at the end of the first episode here, let's talk logistics. Where can you still find Liberty Weekly? Well, where can you still find Vital Dissent? It's going to be hard to kind of shake that. So you can find Vital Dissent at vitaldissent.com. You can also find us at all the same places where you're already subscribed. The YouTube channel will be staying the same. It might be youtube.com/Vital Dissent. But ultimately, you could go to vitaldissent.com and put in /YouTube, Odyssey, Rumble, Instagram, Twitter. Those will be the places to find us on socials, and they will be all linked to forward you to that place. So that's where you can find it. You could probably search also Vital Dissent, and you'll be able to find us on all those platforms. So the other place that you can find us and how you can help support this work, and I would call on everyone, if you like the changes that we've made with the rebrand, and you would like to see more high quality documentary content, which I'm really excited about with Mises Pieces. And like I said, we have the part 1 coming out very soon. Please go on over to libertyweekly.club or vitaldissent.com/newsletter and sign up for the newsletter. I do send out free content on the newsletter, so you don't have to pay to do that. But if you go to libertyweekly.club or vitaldissent.com/newsletter, you'll be taken to my newsletter subscription page. It's called, my column is called What They're Not Telling You. And so you can see the articles that I've put out, and you hit subscribe in the upper right-hand corner, and it will take you to a payment page. If you just want the free version, type in your name and your email address and just hit the free version. And it will sign you up for that. You'll get access to all the public posts and a free digital copy of my ebook on EPUB and Kindle. I do have a free ebook that I send out. You could also go and subscribe at $55 per year, or you can subscribe monthly for $5 a month and do that to help support the podcast. It's not free to produce these documentaries and to produce this high quality video content and all the rebrand and things like that. It all costs money, and we're not exactly breaking even here. So if you would please consider going on over to the newsletter, vitaldissent.com/newsletter. Take a look through the bonus content. You get early access. You get transcripts from these documentary episodes that are hyperlinked. You'll get bonus content. I try to put out a bonus episode once every month with a special guest, usually Connor Freeman or Kyle Anzalone. And you'll be getting all those things. You'll also get the warm and fuzzy feeling of helping to support this important project. We also have new merchandise with the awesome Vital Dissent branding that Ludwig von Mises Pieces made. You can see all these different products: water bottles, notebooks, die cut stickers, coffee cups, pint glasses, a tumbler, and of course sweatshirts and all these different things with the new Vital Dissent logo on it. I think it looks pretty nifty, and all of these products are really high quality. They're Teespring products, I believe, and you can go in and get those. They're premium, so it's not stuff that will I don't know, it won't spalling, or there's no loose threads or anything like that, and the logo's not going to rub itself off after a year or something like that and just disappear. So if you go on to vitaldissent.com/merch, it will go to help me pay my producer, but it will also go help to all of the costs that go into creating this more high quality content for you guys. Plus, it just looks incredible, man. Like I'm really excited. Mises Pieces did such a great job with all the artwork here. And another sponsor of the show, not exactly a sponsor, but a commission thing, is Stitch Fix. This is where I'm a father of 2 kids. I have my own business, and I do this whenever I have a free second. I don't have time to go shopping, and it takes forever to pick stuff out. And Stitch Fix is great because they assign you a personal stylist that will pick out clothes for you, and they send it right to your door so you can try it on. Free returns. If you go to vitaldissent.com/stitchfix, STITCHFIX, and you sign up, you'll get $25 free, and you also give the show $25 for me to keep up my style. So these are some of the clothes that my stylist had picked out for me that I had bought. And so these are a lot of nice things for work that I do wear, and other things at the top here that I wear for leisure. So vitaldissent.com/stitch fix. All right. So in conclusion, guys, thanks so much for sticking with me. Thanks to everyone who has supported me over the years, who has been a subscriber, who has supported me on Patreon, who has had kind words, who has listened, all those things. I love you guys. Thank you so much for going through this journey with me. I'm really excited about this new chapter. And like I said, it's going to be the same old Patrick McFarlane. It's not going to be exclusively a Liberty show, but it's going to be something, frankly, that I've wanted to do since I started this whole project, which was to create high quality documentary style content that is interesting and informative at the same time. And so with your support, I think I can maintain doing this, even though it's more expensive to do it this way, but I think it's going to be a much more broad appeal. And I really hope that you will share these episodes with people who are not libertarians, because frankly, I really think that some of those people are people who could be great allies and who might be people that really need to hear this. So if you need to inform them on things like that, just consider, sharing this show with them. So, but also subscribe, rate, review, thumbs up, do all those things. It really does help me with the algorithms. And I'm looking to really push my brand now with this new rebrand. So again, we'll be focusing more on narratives. We'll be focusing more on informative, scripted, high depth content, but also key interviews that really bring something new to the table. And we're really excited, and I hope you guys are too. vitaldissent.com, guys. Till next time.